Golf, I honestly don't know where to begin. I'll start with the basic stuff. My name is Alex. I'm 22 years old from 1999 to 2003. I attended a small elementary school in Georgia called Warwood Elementary. It was a private but non-religious school. Or maybe 300 kids total at the time. I was an only child and my parents were divorced. And I never saw my dad after the split, and my mom engaged a new boyfriend. But they never married. Just stayed engaged in any ways. I don't remember my first year of Warwood very clearly as I was in kindergarten. I made a friend named Tony, and we stuck together up until I moved in 2004. And I'm not going to waste your time with useless details about my life, though I'm going to tell you about the weird stuff first. Great, the year 2000. Tony and I were in Mrs. Anderson's class, as she was in her 30s and short hair. Kinda looked like Jamie Lee Curtis in her later years. She was extraordinarily sweet and compassionate. Parents and students alike loved her. Different grades, had different recess times at World, with the pre-K through second grade added at 11:30 through 12 and third through fifth added at 12 through 12:30. Our playground was massive. Despite our small classes, the main playground island had a slide, a bridge ladder's monkey bar, and a huge plastic rock dome with little dinosaur bones on the ceiling beneath it. It was the Dino Dome, as we called it. Tony and I would meet up there with Scotty and Phil, our friends from second grade. Both Scotty and Phil out to older siblings. The Scotty brother was in fourth grade, and Phil's sister was in fifth. You both had attended Warwood. Since pre-K sometime during my first grade here, I remember a rumor went around about the bad chair. Scotty was positive that his brother Mark had been sent to it. I first heard of the bad chair at lunchtime right after recess. I think a boy named Eddie mentioned it to me in a hushed tone. Alex, you know. But the bad chair, I shook my head. Many of my responses to adults and children alike were motions instead of words. I was rather shy. You want to know about the bad chair? I nodded. Okay. You know the teacher's place near the girls' party room. The teacher's place was a small break room. Staff room for teachers, a small place probably had a fridge and a bathroom. I nodded again. Well, some kid says he's seen inside there. He says there's another door. Impossible. I thought no child, living or dead, had singing into the teacher's place. How'd he see it? I asked, unbelieving. He had to go to the potty on his way back to Mrs. Tudor's class. He saw a teacher go in when the door opened. He says there was a table, chairs, and another door. So that's where the bad chair is. I still don't know what that is, you know. J-Boy was a very misbehaved fourth grader. Everybody knew who he was just that week. He'd been expelled for bad behavior. Uh-huh. Remember how I messed up Mrs. Ludkeith's desk last week and then how he used his Boy Scout stuff to set all the tests on fire, uh-huh. Well, he got something worse than detention. Oh yeah, he got kicked out. Eddie giggled condescendingly. That's what they want you to think. The teachers say boy doesn't even live here anymore. He lives at the hospital now. Why a bad chair, of course. Then lunch was over, leaving me with an undying curiosity about the bad chair. I think that was a Friday. So after the weekend came and went, I met up with my pals in the Dino Dome and asked if they had heard about the bad chair, and J-Boy was fate. Someone told me about that? I think it's a big fat fib. Donnie announced, crossing his arms. Eddie told me a little, but he had to go and he reached the good stuff. What is the bad chair? Then from the side of the Dino Dome, the bald head of Steve peeked in. Steve was a fifth grader who was really sick and was lapped 2 recesses. You guys talking about the bad chair. It was extremely rare for a fifth grader, even a special one like Steve, to talk with the likes of first graders. We all froze stunned to have his attention, but not let the teachers hear. Why not feel squeezed? You might get sent there. Steve scanned the playground and crept inside the Dino Dome and knows what'll happen after that. What is the bad cheer, you guys? It's quite flustered at this point, just wanted to know what the darn thing was, true or not. Beneath the school, you can only get to it through a door in the teacher's lounge. Yeah, the fifth graders called the teacher's place of lounge the far too fancy for our taste. What's it do? I inquired. Bad things. Well, duh. My friends gasped. No one talked to fifth graders like that. Steve Oliver didn't seem to care. He once again looked outside of the diner. Domus, just to make sure no teachers were around you. Guys know about J-Boy, right? Yeah. We replied simultaneously. He's a hero, but weren't for him. None of us had know about the batch air. It's been here a long time, but he's the first one to escape it escaped it. Yep, after J-Boy did all that bad stuff, everyone in Lucky's class song gets sent out to the principal's office. Not really Lucky took him into the lounge, and whoever was in the lounge took him down the stairs, the room with a bad chair, and all this. Tony interrupted, still skeptical. He told his best friend Finn from my class about it before he went crazy. He said that the room they took him to was really dark, except for some candles on the floor in the middle is the bad chair. It's wooden and has a bunch of leather straps that they tied him into. But on the top where your head goes, there's a skull. A human skull. Phil shuddered. Steve frowned. No one said anything. Then what I urged. Then they began wood dancing. I laughed, was thinking this is all a build-up to a big joke. Steve just shook his head. Not funny. Dancing. Weird dancing. He said they twisted and bent in impossible ways. They were wearing black clothes, they were whispering, and he screamed, but no one could hear him. He's too far down, how'd he get out? Tony finally looked a little unsettled. Something went wrong. Steve gulped, almost like you were there himself. Something joined them. Hello, boys, Mrs. Chandra. The recess attendant stepped inside the diner dome. We all screamed. Mrs. Shonda jumped, startled by our cries, then laughed. Steve went pale, paler than usual, telling scary stories to the young ones. TV, Mrs. Shonda asked. Yes, ma'am, yeah. Shonda pursed her lips into a smile. Nothing too dark. I hope. Steve shook his head. None of us looked at her. Well, only 5 more minutes until the young ones go back to class. I suppose you'll be out here with the others, Stephen? Yes, ma'am, replied Steve almost robotically. Any more? Scary stories, no, ma'am. Good, very good with that. Mrs. Chandra patted one of us on the back and left. Steve looked like he was about to cry and ran out of the Dino Dome. You didn't see him again. The days following our talk, Steve were quiet and seemingly normal. Steve was absent. The most. Students said that was because of his frequent hospital visits. My friends are not suspected otherwise. Tony, however, raised some good questions regarding the J-Boy situation. Now, why weren't his parents doing anything about this? Surely somebody told them about all the bad chair rumors. And if other kids have been sent to the batch here, why didn't they remember? It couldn't have died or vanished because people would notice large numbers of disappearances and deaths. As the days passed, we learned more information about the bad chair, sometimes by kids in our grade, but usually from 4th and 5th graders, apparently. If the bad chair worked, you didn't remember any of it happening. That was what made the J-Boy think so important. The first time something had gone wrong and he remembered everything. Plenty of other kids are gone, they just didn't know it. Where the 4th and 5th graders received this, intel is still unknown to me. Few months went by the stalks of the bad chair, and J-Boy died down. We were told by a Prince Noor Abner that Steve had spent his last months in hospital fighting hard, but had sadly passed away from cancer. Tony concluded that the bad chair was nothing more than a scary story made up by the 5th graders to freak out us younger kids. We just about believed that until the very last day of our 1st grade year. Summer was approaching fast. So naturally everyone was very excited, and with the excitement comes shenanigans. So to say that last day our 1st grade class joiner was Miss Lucky's 2nd grade class, and we all had a fun little pizza party. We're playing games, singing songs, telling stories usual. And a 2nd grader named William ran through the classroom door. Savage had left just a few minutes before to use the restroom. All the children looked upset and concerned for our classmate Miss Anderson, and Miss Lucky just extinguished serious glances. Anderson was the first to approach him. Will, sweetheart, what's wrong? William could hardly stand up, and he had sobbed so hard that he'd volunteered a little bit onto the carpet. The other kids were grossed out by his upchuck. Their own beats his license loudly call for assistance and clean up, while Anderson patted Will on the back and urged him to share. Would have had upset him. Steve, it's Steve, he finally cried, eyes shut tight. What? Miss Anderson tightened her grip on the boy and tried to pull him out into the hall. He shrieked in protest and curled into the fetal position. One of the adults who had been called to the room, Mom offered to Carla's parents. Wait, said Miss Henderson, let's see if he calms down. The room. Mom looked a tad bothered by the response but agreed to wait just a few more minutes. Miss Anderson asked William again. What had happened? He finally opened his eyes, seemed to have been shut for the entirety of his presence. Let Kay attempted to distract the rest of us in vain. I saw Steve, whimpered. Will eyes red and swollen. Steve who? Anderson asked. Know very well. Which Steve? The child man dead. Steve. The room fell silent for Will sniffles and coughs. Blood key, and the other adult escorted us from the classroom. Miss Anderson talked. Will we all whisper amongst ourselves until we were ordered to remain quiet until our parents arrived. The end of the day had come. And oddly enough, none of us wanted to leave. We needed to know what Will saw. No notice found out, that is, until second grade here started. I have much to say about that summer, except that most nights were spent wondering about Will, Steve, and the bad chair. I would ask Tony if he had heard anything, and he'd ask Phil, would ask Scotty. But no one had. Day one of second grade, Tony and I met up and started asking around about William, who would now be in third grade with Scotty and Phil. None other than Eddie. The same boy who first told me about the bad chair provided us with the answers. The William doesn't go to school here anymore. He's being homeschooled, I think. Why? What happened? This conversation took place in the few minutes we had before class started. He said that while he was taking a pee-pee, he heard weird squishy sounds and growling when he opened up the door, yet Steve was on the ground wiggling about, only wasn't dead. It wasn't even Steve. Now could Steve not be Steve? He was something else too. Like what? I don't know. No one does. It's all I heard. Steve was both alive and something else. To that, Will started seeing a doctor and now he's schooled at home. Miss Led King, who was now our teacher, whistled and ordered us all to take our seats. She told us that students would no longer go to the bathroom by themselves, but would always bring a buddy. This was obviously because of the Stephen J. Boy incidents during recess for the beginning of the year. Mrs. Shonda would poke her head and dine out Dome quite often, even when my pals and I weren't hanging around there. He started doing it so much that we stopped going there altogether. Instead, walked around the playground at a steady pace. If we needed to talk one day, Scotty said that his older brother, who was now in 5th grade, been sent to detention for cheating on a test. Scotty asked him what detention was like. Caleb, his brother, said he didn't remember. Said he fell asleep or something. He's got to begin crying. I started bringing up the bat chair. Mrs. Shonda saw he doesn't feel well, I told her when asked what the tears are about. Scotty held his tongue and went along with it. Mrs. Shonda has to feed, like to see the nurse offering to walk him back. Scotty refused but began to cry harder. Then Reese has handed Mrs. Shawn guided us back to class. Then we saw her go into the teacher's place down the hall. Now this, I remember clearly, just 2 rooms down. The kindergarten class was having nap time. We were having a math lesson. Miss Lucky was talking about basic fractions as something. When all the lights went out, I heard screaming, crying, loud. Key ran out of the room, leaving us with her assistant named Rachel, who told us to remain calm. About 3 minutes passed before the lights came back on. The screaming, crying lasted without a single pause for the entire period. Darkness. When light returned, they ceased almost immediately. It was the kindergartners. Miss Lecky told us they were afraid of the dog. That wasn't even close to what the kindergartners at recess told us. They'd fallen the power outage in screaming rooms at recess. My friends and I decided to ask some kitten gardeners would have caused them so much fright. Many kindergartners were not at school that day. We managed to find a few. Wall told an extremely similar story for the sake of readability. I will change the language and grammar they use to be more coherent. The accounts of follow obviously not how kindergartners talk, but rather how I added them. All the details are exactly as they said, just touched out. First, we asked blonde girl, I don't recall her name before. Nap time started. Miss Natasha prayed for us. This was already a bizarre thing too. Here's our school was non-religious. Parents have gotten into fits over any mention of religious activity, who were influenced by teachers. She wasn't praying to God. She was praying to something else. I can't pronounce it. It didn't sound like English. She mentioned Steve, dead, Steve, and J-Boy, and it made us feel weird, like tingly sleepier than we were before. I don't know how long we're asleep before something came. What came? The girl started trembling and looked like she was about to cry. But in an instant she calmed down, even smiled a bit. It was beautiful. She said so beautiful. She didn't say much else. But another kindergarten I did miss. Natasha prayed for us before nap time started. I started feeling hard after she mentioned Steve and Jay born something else. I don't know how to say. It was weird, but I got sleepy real fast. Some of my friends closed their eyes, but I fought to keep mine open because I wasn't sleepy before I kind of had to pee. I pulled my blanket over my head so Miss Natasha wouldn't notice I was awake. The kid had a particularly blank stare and expressionless face, but it found him sitting by the swing set not doing anything at all. I heard the classroom door open. Miss Natasha walked out. I could tell because I heard her heels clicking against the floor, took out my blanket, and then something joined. What joined? I snapped. Haven't had the answer taken away last time. It knew I was awake. It didn't want me to be awake. I shouldn't been awake. The boys' pay started to increase. It was hard to catch every word. It was not in a state of panic like the other job, though. It stood above me. It stood right above me. Heavy weight. It was on me, but I knew it wasn't touching me. I was scared. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I didn't cry, and I should have been asleep, and we couldn't understand anymore. After that, we talked to one more kindergarten, and his name. I remember, his name was Joshua L. He had tennis ball friends. You know, the tennis balls they cut open and put on the legs of chairs. Yeah, he took those off and drew eyes on them and talked to them. We saw him do it at recess a lot anyway. We talked to him, and every time he said something he moved the mouths of his tennis ball friends. We were getting ready to sleep when Miss Natasha said a prayer for us. Our God is a funny name and he cares about dead Steve and Jay. I got a warm and tingly, so I closed my eyes to sleep, and then I slept, and then something came. Tony interjected. Joshua put one of his tennis balls right in Tony's face. Yes, something did. I know this because we all woke up and the lights were off. Mr. Natasha had left them on. I didn't know where she was then. We all screamed, all of us at first. We didn't know why, not even me. I was screaming. And I didn't even know why I screamed until it hurt. I felt like I had to know. Teachers came in to check on us. No matter what they said, we were alone with something touched all of us. One by one knew my name. None of us said anything. Then Joshua said something. It was undeniable. And then he smiled, and recess was over. No kindergartners told their parents what had happened. No one else asked, or if they did, they didn't say, just me. Tony, Scotty, and Phil knew what Josh and the others had said. School continued like normal for years. Anticlimactic. Right? Nope. I don't think things were actually normal because I found something out. Just 3 days ago, my mom told me a story about my second grade year that I didn't remember. She said my friends and I had drawn nasty stuff on our teacher's whiteboard. She said we got sent to detention for that. I don't remember that at all. I know what happened, only one explanation. We didn't draw stuff on the whiteboard. We didn't get sent to detention. We got sent somewhere else. We took a seat in the bad chair, and whatever happened there worked. All my memories of the rest is second grade and third grade and fourth grade cannot be trusted. I returned to Augusta, Georgia to fun war. Would instead I found a different school in this place, which for their sake I will not name the building, though was same as Warwood, was refurbished and painted differently. I entered the school and asked the front desk about its history, explaining that I used to attend the school when it was called Warwood. Oh yes, Warwood. It was renamed after the management changing. Oh, for management change. Yes, most of the original staff quit or relocated rather abruptly to many different places, the DuPont and Fayetteville, D.C. Firebroker, Philly. I paused. Was any reconstruction done to the interior? My eyes glanced down the hall where the teacher's lounge has originally been. No, what I don't think so. Why not just have some fuzzy memories in one room? I'd like to clear them up. I'm afraid I can't let you into any of the rooms of that special permission. That's okay. I understand. Would you happen to know if any of the old teachers from, or would still work here, just one I believe, who Natasha Tuber, she still teaches kindergarten? Did she teach you? Not me personally, but I do remember her. Would you like to speak with her after school? The day ends at about an hour. Yes, I would appreciate that. Thanks. I took a seat outside the office and browsed on my phone. The woman at the front desk had called Natasha's room and informed her that she had a visitor. "What's your name, sir?" she asked me. "Alex, his name is Alex. He's a former student." Some brief conversation passed, none. She hung up. "Natasha remembers you, very excited to see you, good." I smiled. My heart was skipping beats and I felt nauseous, but I did my best to hide it. I excused myself to the restroom, which was exactly where I remembered it. I recalled the story about dead Steve appearing in this very bathroom, and I knew the teachers around was just to run over. I did my business, and as I washed my hands, a child entered. "Hello," said the boy. "Hello," said the boy. "Hey, I'm good with children, the children. I know that is." At this point, I was afraid of being labeled a pervert and spoke with children in her elementary restroom, however, and did my best to avoid saying much of anything, but kids sees they can be very social, and this one was, "Are you someone's daddy?" Nope, why wasn't this boy even going to the bathroom? He was standing outside the stalls watching me wash my hands. "You look like someone's daddy." "Okay." I drive my hand as an awkwardly waved goodbye. The boy remains still staring as I left the restroom. I looked to my left and saw the door to the lounge. The door had been redone and was far fancier. Now it even said Teacher's Lounge on the window. Very cliché. I casually strolled by and looked inside with my eyes corners. I didn't see anyone. Then I got a bad idea. I decided to test the doorknob. It was unlocked, so I went inside. Fridge, coffee table, sink, staff, restroom chairs. Door, the same door I'd seen glimpses of in my time at Warped Wood. I did a precautionary check behind me, confirming that no teachers were heading inside now that I'd be able to avoid them anyhow. Then I returned my attention to the door. It was now or never. I supposed I approached it with a trembling hand and twisted the doorknob. It creaked open exactly how you'd imagine an old door would. I peered into a dark staircase that descended straight downward. Cold air washed over my face, and my head began to throb. I took a step inside, and a thriving girl, worse it did with every step down. There was no light I could see at the bottom yet. I continued with my phone screen as a guide. The pain in my head stretched down to my spine. My body knew I opinion before whatever happened wasn't good. As I reached the bottom of the stairwell, I spotted a light switch on the right with my phone. I flicked it out. I'm not knowing what to expect. Boxes, lots of boxes and shelves, no bad chair, no candles, no satanic symbols or skeletons, pictures of children. Despite this, my head and back still ached. "Welcome back." Alex. Natasha stood on the bottom step smiling and dressed in a floral gown. Now I'm leaving out of my way. I did not know how threatening I sounded. Though I did try open up the box. "Alex," I said, "move a walk forward with fists, balls." But she did not care. She did not even look at me. You looked behind me, a grin wider. "What the hell did you do to me in here?" I had broken, I had given in and asked. She knew I was afraid she had leverage. Natasha said the same thing that girl in kindergarten class had said. It was beautiful, so beautiful. Then she pointed to the storage boxes. "Take a look." No, yes, I wanted to, or at least something inside me wanted to. But I refused. Tony Scott. Phil, they came back to shut up. Natasha moved past me very gently, as though walking on air. I wanted to burst up the stairs, but something held me back. She knelt down by a rather large box to the right of the room and opened it. It had not been sealed. She stuck her entire left arm inside of it and grunted as she lifted an object out. As soon as I saw it, I fell to my knees. I remembered it just barely. This girl, none of a human and of no animal I had ever seen. I was frozen in place. Pain in my body was nestled extreme that I wish I had to wait to kill myself. Natasha spoke, but it was unknown Cybele. Then she placed the skull on top of my head in my mind, saw them all, teachers dressed in black, the candles bonds of my wrists and ankles, the road ones, the way they move with a bent, their faces distorted beyond imagination, the shaking of the ground beneath me, the freezing blast to wind from somewhere else, and they all shrieked and bowed in the corner. I saw Tony and Phil and Scotty. They were solving and vomiting. Their eyes rolled back in their heads. I returned to the moment at hand and watched Natasha die. That demented bald boy with something on him was tearing at a flesh-dead Steve. My eyes closed and I heard the screams of kindergartners, the prayers of Natasha, the songs of the faculty, the unpronounceable. I remembered all those days at school after I had taken his seat in the bad chair. My throne, the hour spending worship, the plans, the visions. unpronounceable entering children. Entering me. I didn't know his work dead. Steve J. Boy when he did work. Well, there's a little piece of something everywhere he left me for a while, but he's back now. He always comes back to all of us. There's nothing that can be done about it. Everyone will sit down. Everyone will be someone. What do people usually fear when moving out to live on their own? What sort of problems does one normally encounter when finally venturing from the safety of their parents' home into a place of their own? Perhaps it's paying their rent on time or having to do all the cleaning without any of mommy's help. These were the things I anticipated. I never could have predicted the events of the past week. We had finally moved the last box into my new house single-level ranch, and only 2 bedrooms, but for a bachelor like me it was a dream come true. The house was right in the heart of a great suburban neighborhood with a 2-car driveway and a pretty big backyard. When I had seen the yard, the first thing I thought of was all the parties I'd be hosting. I stepped onto the deck and took a breath of fresh air while closing my eyes to imagine the endless nights of friends, booze, and of course women. I stretched my arms out and let out an exuberant sigh of relief as I scanned my surroundings. I couldn't help but notice the elevated deck gave me the proper vantage point to see into my neighbors' backyards. I figured since I hadn't formally met any of them yet, I would try and guess now who might have to worry about if my parties got too rowdy, and the risk of 911 calls would become a harsh reality. Am I right? I saw a vibrant garden, a grill, and a hammock. I figured it was a middle-aged couple. Hopefully they're not too old and cranky, I thought to myself as I turned my head to view my neighbors to the left. That's when I saw him under a large oak tree, adorned in colorful Christmas lights, was what looked to be a young boy swinging away on his playset. Great, I thought. I bet his bedtime is a lot earlier than any party I throw would be ending. I continued to look at the boy. His back was turned to me. He wore a hoodie and gloves, which struck me as odd since it was summer and pretty warm outside. I brushed it off and assumed the boy was sick. I went back inside and began to unpack everything with the help of some friends we managed to put together. All my furniture, hook up my home entertainment system, and more or less get the house in working order. I just sent out the text, "Guys, get ready to party tonight," I exclaimed as I leapt off the couch and finished my beer. The guys all began to cheer, and a round of high fives were exchanged by now. The sun was setting as it had been several hours since we had first brought in all my belongings. My friend Dan was unpacking one of the last boxes as he eagerly looked out of the window. "Have you met your neighbors yet? Any fine young ladies going to be coming around here asking to borrow some sugar?" he asked in a sarcastic tone as he turned to me with a lewd gesture. Smiling and walking over, I replied, No, I get. But I don't think I'll have much luck in that department from the looks of it. It's just a bunch of normal families, one of them even as a kid." As I pointed to the house I had seen earlier, my face scrunched to show a look of confusion and surprise. The boy I had seen swinging earlier was still there. He was still swinging under the ambiance of the little tree. Weird, that kid was swinging when we first got here too, I said to Dan as he looked at his phone, barely acknowledging my comment. He raised his hand up and mumbled, "Must be special ed kid or something." He walked off, calling more people to invite them to the housewarming party. I turned back to the swinging boy. He couldn't have been swinging this whole time, could he? That night, as planned, we had my Harris warming party. It was such a great time. I greeted my friends and cousins as they arrived, handing them all the beverage of their choice. We were outside until around 3 or 4 in the morning when the weather suddenly got cool and it began to drizzle. I would have been willing to stick it out until it passed, but the girls all began to freak out, claiming their hair would frizz, and they all ran inside. Naturally, the guys followed, holding makeshift umbrellas over the girls' heads, and laughed at myself at how hard they were trying to get lucky. I took the opportunity to quickly clean up some of the trash that had accumulated. Before going inside, I scooped up a bunch of cans and bottles, before I turned around and was left in hay. I guess we were all distracted by the music and alcohol to notice earlier, but now with everyone inside I saw it. The boy was still outside, and on his swing he was still in the same position. An outfit I'd seen him in all day, back turned to me, wearing the same hoodie and gloves. I stood there for a minute, lost in thought, when from behind me I heard a loud "Hiya, neighbor," then jumped in, did a quick 180, dropping the trash I'd been carrying. Oh, sorry about that, bud, didn't mean to startle you," laughed an elderly man. He was wearing pajamas and slippers as he held his hand out. waiting for a shake on my end. "Oh, hello, sir," I said as I cleared my throat and shook his hand, collecting my thoughts. He smiled and began to fumble with his hands. "I hate to be that guy, especially since you just moved in and everything, but you think you guys can turn down the music a bit. My wife and I are pretty light sleepers, and at this age we tend to be early risers," he said bashfully. I smiled and laughed as I put my hand to my face in embarrassment. "Haji's. I'm sorry, sir. I guess things got a little crazier than planned. I didn't think people would stick around this long. I really did feel bad. I half expected the man to come out yelling, demanding us to keep it down less. He called the cops. This gentle demeanor was refreshing, and I was more than happy to oblige. I laughed and replied, "I'll go. Let everyone know that they need to stay inside and take it down a notch. I'm Peter, by the way." I shook his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Peter. I'm Paul," he said with a grin as he smiled. His eyes drifted past mine and towards the swinging boy. "I assume you've noticed the languorous kid by now, huh?" asked Paul as he cupped his hands and breathed into them to try to keep warm. "Yeah," I said as I turned to face him. "What's the deal with him? He's been on that thing all day." Paul shrugged. "Not sure. No one really knows the story. He just swings and swings until eventually Paul stopped and his eyes widened. "Wait, yeah, it's happening, check it out." I turned around to find the boy had stopped swinging. He sat completely still for a moment before slowly rising from the rubber seat of the swing. He began to shake violently, falling to his knees and scraping the dirt below him. Even from where we were standing, we were able to hear his quick bursts of shrieking and gurgling. I became concerned. Was the boy okay? It looked like he was having an asthma attack or a seizure. I started to run to the boy in order to help, but stopped after a couple of steps. His mother had run out. I looked at her completely sober now from the adrenaline that was pumping through my body. Who I was not a pleasant sight. She was a frail, haggard woman with a gray, knotted mane of hair on her head. Her skin was pale, and her eyes had dark bags underneath it. Looked as if she hadn't slept or had a proper meal for ages. Mrs. Langer rushed out quick, and holding a small orange bottle, the kind one would receive from a pharmacist, after she reached her boy. She knelt down and poured several white pills into her hand before she could even finish offering the pills to her son. He had grabbed her arm and buried his face into the palm of her hand, and hailing the pills, Mrs. Langer pulled away and began to rub her wrist. It appeared the boy had hurt her, which did not really surprise me due to how skinny the woman was, Paul, and I watched intensely without uttering a single word. After a moment or two, the boy simply rose back to his feet, sat back down on his swing and resumed his leisurely activity. Mrs. Langer grabbed the now empty orange bottle and proceeded back inside, still clutching her wrist. Paul and I were both shaken up. We had no idea what we had just seen. Wow. I've seen the boys spaz out before, but never that bad. I bet whatever condition he has is getting more severe, poor kid, Paul said as he rubbed the back of his head. What exactly is wrong with him? I asked, with my eyes still glued to the child. Like I said, I don't know. No one around here does, Paul replied, turning around and walking back to his door anyway. My wife is probably getting worried. You have a good night, Peter. Yeah. I sighed, arranging my thoughts. Nice meeting you, Paul. We both exchanged a final wave and returned to our respective households. The party was dying down when I entered, and I was glad what I had just seen took a lot out of me. The next morning I felt like the copious waves of alcohol I had carelessly consumed the night prior had finally caught up to me. My head throbbed and I was severely parched. I stood up in the arid sensation, and my mouth and throat was quickly replaced by feelings of nausea. I scrambled to the bathroom and dropped to my knees, clutching the porcelain for dear life. At least I have the day off to recover. I thought to myself. I grabbed the sports drink I had strategically placed in the bathroom the day before in anticipation for my hangover, and chugged it down. In only a few gulps, I was no stranger to this feeling, and I knew what to expect. Within a couple of minutes, I began to vomit, and immediately felt better, though not enough to have a very productive day. I mentally prepared myself for a day of movies, video games, and junk food after a couple of hours of lying in my borderline vegetative state. I heard the mailman make his stop at my door in no mood to get off the couch. I ignored it and continued binge-watching the zombie show everybody was raving about. Was probably not the best idea to be observing such grotesque gore. Well, it felt as if a war was being waged in my stomach, and I sucked it up and continued to watch several episodes later. I made my way to the kitchen and popped in a giant TV dinner into the microwave. Well, it cooked. I decided I would bring in the mail from earlier. I unlocked the front door and let in some much-needed fresh air. I stood at the door and scooped up the contents of my mailbox, sifting through the junk mail and the bills. When I saw I'd received a package without scanning the box for more details, I brought the small box inside and cut off the tape. I opened it only to find a small orange bottle like the one I'd seen my neighbor holding last night. I was puzzled and searched for the mailing label on the box. A mailman had delivered it to the wrong house. Annoyed, I heard a big sigh. I was not in the mood to get dressed and leave the house for anything, let alone awkwardly meet new neighbors in order to tell them I have the pills for their weirdo son. I looked out of my back window and saw the boy was swinging away as usual. I heard my microwave go off, indicating my food was ready, with one last glance at the child. I told myself the pills can wait, as the boy had scarfed down several the night before. I tossed the bottle of pills aside and made my way to the kitchen after eating. I felt fatigued, which caused me to fall asleep on the couch. I woke up from my sleep to the sound of commotion outside my home. The repetitive beeping of a large vehicle in reverse echoed through my brain. Nightfall had arrived and my house was engulfed in almost absolute darkness. The only light I could see was a dull gray from my now idle television and the swirl of red and blue illuminating through my windows. The scene that I awoke to was almost surreal, and I thought for a moment that I was dreaming. I got on my feet and I looked through my front window. A crowd had gathered on my front lawn. They were facing the ambulance that was parked in the driveway of the Langer house. I threw on a light coat to hide my stain, most likely rancid smelling. Sure, I had been stewing in all day in the crowd. Paul stood amongst several other people who I presumed to be residents in the neighborhood. "Hey, Paul," I blurted, as I cleared the phlegm from my throat. "The hell is going on?" With his eyes still glued to the scene that unfolded next door, he replied, "Well, we're not exactly sure. We think something may have happened to someone in the house. Mr. Langer is speaking with one of the paramedics and looks panicked." I saw the man Paul was referring to, like his wife, Mr. Langer, also looked as if his body was depleted and barren. He wore a loose tank top that showed just how skinny he was. His ribs poked through the pale, tight skin on his torso. He was pacing around, frantically covering his eyes and mumbling something to himself. I was still gazing at the distraught man when the soft murmuring of the crowd around me erupted into a frenzy of screams and cries. I turned to the door of the Langer house and red began to fill my body. 2 policemen exited the house, followed by a paramedic who wheeled out a gurney. The top of the gurney was the bloodied body of the seemingly lifeless Mrs. Langer. From where we were standing, we were able to see the pale, bruised wrists of the poor woman hanging from the side. Blood running down and dripping from her fingertips. It began to twitch in her head, bobbed around as the paramedic pressed an oxygen mask to her face and hoisted the gurney into the back of the ambulance. I turned to Paul, who was standing on the tip of his feet. In order to see over the crowd, one of the policemen made his way over to our now frantic group of screaming men and women, ordering us to disperse and return to our homes. Everyone began to bombard the officer with questions, asking what happened and if they were safe. "You have nothing to worry about. People, it appears a group of coyotes attacked Mrs. Langer in her backyard. We've since located and neutralized the animals," remarked the officer, avoiding eye contact with anyone before him. It was clear he was lying through his teeth. I raised my hand and showed it above the crowd. "And what about the boy? Was he hurt?" The officer shot me a look of irritation and cleared his throat as he hesitantly announced he was not anywhere near the scene of the attack. "We assumed he got scared and ran away for safety, and we're in the process of looking for the child. If anyone sees him, please call 911 immediately." With that, the officer turned his back to the less than satisfied crowd and almost ran back to his cruiser. I turned to Paul, who bared a look of dismay. He turned and shot an apathetic smile before patting me on the back and making his way inside. I stood there for a moment after the crowd slowly disbanded. Was this my fault? Did it have something to do with the pills? I quickly disregarded the paranoid thoughts that plagued my mind and walked back to my home. I slid through the front door that I had carelessly left ajar and shut it behind me as I slid down and cut my hands around my head. There was a legion of emotions coursing through me as I pondered my next move. I knew I had to get the pills out of my house, though the chances were slim. I did not want any blame being directed to me for not returning the pills sooner. Hello? I knew I had committed at least one federal crime when I unknowingly opened somebody else's mail. I decided I would anonymously place the box of pills in the Langer's mailbox and dash back inside. I grabbed the pills from my couch and glanced out of the back window. The Christmas lights in the oak tree were as bright as ever, illuminating the grisly crime scene that lied just below. Blood and ripped clothing veiled the ground. That's when I saw them. The boy's gloves and hoodie were lying amongst the carnage. My heart sank. I was sure the boy was dead, or at the very least critically injured. Tears began to fill my eyes as I banged my fists on the windowsill. The sudden burst of sound emanated throughout my home. I hadn't made a peep since I entered. The sudden contrast in sound made the shameful silence that followed even more noticeable. In the midst of the grim silence, I heard it, the low, spine-tingling gurgle that flowed from my bedroom. I froze, barely breathing. I listened keenly for another sound. To my dismay, I heard it again. Another disgusting gurgle, now louder and fiercer, almost like a growl. The lights in my home were still all off, aside from the weak aura that radiated from the idle television. I was frozen still. My body rebelled against my mind's desire to move. Instinct began to kick in as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and a fight or flight became a quick reality. I did not know what was in my house. All I knew was I was definitely going to choose flight. I pulled out my phone and fumbled for the flashlight app as I took a step towards my back door. My eyes were glued to the short hallway that connected the main area of the house to my bedroom. That's when I saw it. A small creature began to crawl from the hallway. I could barely make out any of its features. It looked human, but on all fours. The way it moved was eerie and awkward. The appendages moved sloppily and its head was to the ground. I heard the same terrifying gurgle from the creature and realized it was sniffing the floor, and what happened next still fills me with dread. When I looked back, the flashlight app I had opened had finished loading up and powered on through the phone. The bright light pierced the darkness and lit up the monstrous figure. I felt sick. Do you ever get the feeling in the middle of a nightmare where you start to suspect you aren't in reality and you're begging yourself to wake up? That desperate feeling of despair coursed through every fiber of my being. In front of me stood the Langer boy with all the layers of clothing he usually wore. I was able to see him for what he really was. This was not a normal child. His skin was tattered and worn out. Wrinkles and scars embellished his body. He slowly raised his head to the source of the light. Our eyes met his eyes. Or the worst part, however intense the darkness around his mother's eyes were, they could not compete with the boy's. The black around his peepers only worked to showcase his dilated pupils in the unnatural color of the irises. I might as well have been made of stone. All my ability to move had completely ceased. I could only stand there and watch the situation unfold before me. The boy slowly turned his body in my direction and began to take steps closer and closer. He left bloody prints where his hands met the wood grain of my floor. It was not long until he was less than a foot from me, for what seemed like an eternity. He did not move. Neither of us did. My mind was warped in panic, and I thought I would pass out before I had the chance. The boy rose from his animal-like posture. He was now standing on his feet, arms dangling to his sides. His eyes peered into mine. I stared back, still paralyzed with fear. He began to sluggishly turn his focus from my eyes to my hand, the one that still clutched a bottle of the pills. As soon as he realized what I held, he broke the silence and let out a demonic shriek like that of a banshee. Only his mouth moved as his jaw dropped. This awoke me from my trance, and I fell down, still facing the boy. He crouched so that his face met mine. His mouth was still agape, exposing his sharp, mangled teeth. The tiny razor still contained small shreds of what I assumed to be his mother's flesh. He stretched his arm toward me and unraveled his blood-stained hand instantly. I knew what he was after. My voice trembled. You watched your bills, right? He continued to stare at me, unwavering. I lifted up my hand and began to open the small orange bottle with shaking hands. I poured several pills into the palm of the child and waited for a minute, and did not know a time could move so slowly. I just wanted him to leave eventually. The boy's mouth shut and curled into a faint smile. He turned and made his way to the back door. He shot one final glance over to me as he tilted his head back and consumed all the pills I had given him with an audible gulp. He pushed open the door and wandered back to his sanctuary. I watched as the boy took a seat on his swing and began to sway forward and backward, like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I managed to shut my back door before collapsing to the ground. It's been a week since that night and I've returned the pills as planned. Mrs. Langer is still in critical condition and now her husband has taken over feeding the mysterious pills to his son whenever he needs them. I was never questioned by anyone about what transpired that night. I did not report the incident. I plan to move out soon, maybe to an apartment in the city where there are no yards or playsets. The nightmares and fear from that night have run rampant in my mind. My backyard's still a mess from the party. I have not dared to go back there in order to clean things up. This is due to the fact that since that fearful night, the boy makes sure to swing facing my home. Whenever I even glanced out of the window, I see his haunting eyes peering into mine as he smiles that horrid smile. The last I saw of the boy was his father coming out to give him another dose of the medication. Mr. Langer was down to his last bottle that was 3 long nights ago. I'm looking out of the window now to see what I expected to see, an empty swing. Found myself rushing my daughter to the hospital. I remember the morning, what time I woke up, the food I ate, and the sound of my girl's voice yelling, "See your daddy," as she ran out the door to catch a school bus. Everything was normal average, but were there signs? Could I have expected to bring her home from school at 12 that afternoon? Could I have guessed the cause to be chest pains, or predicted that those pains would return again, 11 hours later, causing her to cry out in pain and fear? Could I have been better prepared for the race to the ER that ensued just before her heart gave out? I don't know. I remember that night, the heavy rain pounding against my car, creating a slick sheen on the streets that made driving over 40 impossible. The images of street maps and traffic lights bleeding into one another on my windshield. I remember the franticness I felt as I gripped the steering wheel, swerving and slamming on the horn to warn the blurry shapes of pedestrians to get off the Tino road, before they ended up getting personal with the front of my car. I remember her wide eyes as she held her chest in agony, the suffocating sense of hopelessness that filled the air around her by the time we reached the parking lot, where she fell unconscious, her motionless chest. By the time I carried her through those automatic doors, what followed was a long 40 minutes in the waiting room. The emergency room was surprisingly empty for a Friday night, apart from the woman at the check-in desk, the face a mask of indifference. I doubted she had much interest in discussing why I was there, soaking wet and tapping my foot in my pajamas. Looking back, that indifference seems vaguely irritating at the time. It was fine by me. I wasn't feeling talkative anyway. I sat in an uncomfortable waiting room chair and thought about my daughter. I wondered what those doctors were doing to her in that disgusting hospital room. My mind jumped back and forth between the present and the last time I'd seen something like this. My wife had had a similar episode 8 years before, shallow breathing, chest pain, sweating, moaning, a look of panic. I'll never forget that look, the look of someone whose time had come for her. It had from a combination of heart and lung failure. She died officially in the emergency room, though by the time the ambulance arrived, there wasn't anything that doctors could have done to save her, considering that I thought maybe it wasn't so irrational that I'd chosen to drive recklessly through the streets to the hospital myself, as opposed to calling 911 and waiting for my daughter to die. Still, the ride was rough. I probably did even more damage. I braced myself for the worst. The news, when it came, fell somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. Not bad, certainly not good. She's unconscious, but her breathing stable. The doctor started relieved. I interrupted and thanked him for telling me she was all right. At least that's what I thought he was saying before I sensed his grim disposition and cut myself off. He repeated, she wasn't dead, but went on to report that she was far from healthy. At the time, the doctors could only guess at what was causing her symptoms. But within a few days, we learned my daughter was functioning with diseased heart and lungs, likely hereditary. They said something inside me couldn't help but agree. Her heart was already struggling to pump blood while her lungs made breathing difficult directly and quite coolly. The doctors told me if something wasn't done, and soon the consequences would be dire. This wasn't a situation that could be remedied by a prescription. If she expected to live and regain her health, she would need a donor for one heart and at least one lung. They said so she was put on an organ donor list. We were asked to return weekly to make sure she remained stable until her number came up simple. But there was one thing I neglected to acknowledge initially, something never mentioned by the doctors, probably to keep our hopes up. A stress would make things complicated. Her blood. I was the one that had to ask. I needed to know what the chances were of finding a suitable donor. I never found out for a fact whether or not the doctors knew her chances from the start, whether they knew all along how rare her blood was. I never wanted to know. Ignorance is bliss, as they say. And the idea that if we hung in just long enough the organs would come like a postal package would have made the waiting more bearable. It would have been. So I wouldn't have inquired. I would have blamed time. Until the letter suggested I asked. It was around 3 weeks after that first harrowing night in the hospital that my daughter was deemed healthy enough to go back to school out of caution. I stayed home from work that day, waiting tensely by the phone in case something happened. At least that way I figured I wouldn't be on the other side of town if I needed to pick her up. It was 1 hour before she was due to return home, 2 hours after the mailman should have made his daily rounds and must have been dozing off at the time because I awoke to a strong whiff of something dreadful. He came and went so quickly I was unsure whether I had only imagined it, but for a second my nose was filled with a pungent aroma that smelled something like burning fish and wet smoke. Next I heard the unfamiliar scraping sound of something sliding, 1 hour 6 minutes 49 seconds, through my mail slot, despite the fact that no one, not even the mailman, ever used the thing. While I found it strange, I didn't feel like checking right away to see who could have delivered the letter 5 minutes. I lay there before deciding to get my mail. Once at my door, I saw the envelope on the mat. I picked it up and examined it completely. Blank. There was no return address, no sending address, not even a stamp. It was just a sealed blank envelope. I went to my window to appear outside. I didn't see anyone in the yard. No foreign cars were in my driveway or parked all on the sidewalk either. I shrugged, figuring I must have missed them, envelope in hand. I sat back onto my couch and stared at him momentarily as I held it. I swear my fingertips started tingling as though the envelope were made of little insect legs trying to wriggle out of my grasp. I have scently passed the sensation of his nerves before finally opening the letter. I'm not quite sure that I should have the tingling sensation left after the seal was broken, and took out the letter inside. Its texture was oddly damp. I remember the message well. It said, "You have a daughter that needs a heart and lungs, or she will die. You won't find anything. Her blood is rare. Ask about the blood. You can still save her. The clock is ticking. You can exchange a child close to her age for her life. You must have them alive to 67. It was when I read those 5 lines. I started to hear clicking as though someone were lightly rapping their fingernail on the back of my skull at irregular intervals, since the message was so subtle, so ambiguous. Though my immediate questions overshadowed any other thoughts or feelings. Was this a threat? A joke? Who knew about my daughter's condition? She barely did. I mentally ran through a list of names of the few friends and family members with whom my daughter and I associated. None had the closeness, the timing, or the motivation to pull this off. My first instinct was to go to the police with the letter, after my own mental investigation yielded no results. Unfortunately, when I did, the police investigation came up likewise short, in fact, without a return address or even a return trace of fingerprints. Other than my own, there was not much investigation to be done. Furthermore, without any act of physical violence or a direct threat, the authorities would not or could not do much to help. They just told me to remain cautious, keep my house secure, put the letter out of my mind and go back to work. Try not to think about it. They said crazy folk will do this sort of thing from time to time still. I couldn't stop thinking about the message about the blood, That letter I received wasn't the last for the next few months, every 1 to 2 weeks. I received another message. Each one was more disturbing than the last. Some were short poems detailing how I would stare at her tombstone, wondering what I could have done. Others were more graphic, describing her choking on her own fluids as her faulty heart drew blood into her floored lungs. One had a different number at the bottom. Their meaning would eventually become clear, but at the time, that was simply unable to make the connection. The worst part of the whole deal had to be the clicking with every word from those letters. The clicks became louder and louder. When I neglected to read, only one of the clicks would spike in volume and frequency, until I did, living with terrible headaches from which no painkillers or earplugs could save me. I heard clicks when people talked a word on the radio that couldn't even enjoy dinner with my daughter anymore. A recall screaming at her wants to shut her damn mouth before storming out of the kitchen. Even in my dreams, that click served as a metronome and never-ending soundtrack as my mind, against my will, acted out the messages, stories, or predictions. No one but me could hear them. I tried chopping it up to stress of the letters reminding me that my daughter's chances of survival were in the single digits. Still, even that excuse couldn't prepare me for my eventual mental collapse. One of the messages came shortly before the end of my daughter's school year. I found her home a half hour earlier than me. Reading one of the letters, I snatched it away from her, scolding her for checking mail that wasn't hers truthfully. Though I didn't want her to see the messages often describing my or her own demise, but instead of expressing the same fear and disgust I felt when I first read them, she simply gave me a puzzled look. Then she spoke, saying something along the lines of, "Dead, it's just a bunch of scribbles. Relax." It was then I actually read the letter. I mean, really read the letter. Not with my own inner monologue, not with the clicks, just scanning the markings on the page with my eyes. What I saw was nothing more than a series of smeared lines and curves. After the first letter, I hadn't thrown away the messages I received. I had thought I would collect them as evidence to eventually show the police again, to better convey that this was undeniably a long-term problem, but with the knowledge that the mess that was this most recent letter had at first appeared so like the others. I was compelled to go back and check through my archives of the disturbing mail I had now been receiving for months. I saw that starting from the second letter onwards, the letters appeared to gradually become more unclear, finally reaching the altogether unintelligible state of the letter I was given today. Still, I understood them all. When I listened to the clicks, were the clicks translating this unreadable chicken scratch? I couldn't go back into work thinking about that. Another week passed. I took about 2 weeks of CGLA from my job. I spent them waiting by the door for the next letter. I didn't know when it would come, but I knew I had to catch the sender. The letters, the lips, the translation. I needed answers. It became an obsession. Each day became a blur of me staring at the door, waiting for someone besides my daughter to walk up to it. Occasionally, I daydreamed about catching this elusive letter carrier, pinning them down, bringing my fist down on their snot-nosed face again and again, screaming why and how, until they gave me an answer. I liked the clicks, approved at these violent fantasies. I scared the mailman off on the third day, screaming at him that I knew it was him. I knew it wasn't. Though he never came to my doorstep, and he had no means or motive to make this happen. I don't know why I did it. The clerks approved of the blame. The day came eventually. I detected that memorable scent of fishy wet smoke. I wasn't expecting it, but I didn't have 5 minutes for another mental check. I left for the door before they could even get the chance to think of slipping another letter through. I was sure I had them. I swung the door open to reveal my empty porch. I smiled. I let out a small chuckle before giving a hyena-like laugh. I leaned against the frame of the door, clutching my stomach, laughing. I slipped to the ground, so I was crazy. It explained so much. That damn fishy smoke I smelled was all in my head. Those clicks reverberating in my skull was because I'd snapped and knew it. I did. I called out 2 imaginary men in white, telling them to stick me in a straitjacket right then and there. Because I had lost my mind, that's what I thought. When I got up and walked back into my house, when I closed the door, I heard the slot and felt a piece of paper ricochet off my leg. I didn't feel that. I tried to convince myself I'm crazy and mad. The smell vanished. My smile didn't. Chills run up my spine. I picked up the letter and took it back to the couch. I didn't bother looking out the window or opening the door again. I knew no one would be there. I read the contents of the letter. Or rather, I listened to the clicks whisper them into my ear. It was one line, "Your girl will talk with death today at work at 2:30. I got a call from the school saying my daughter had just been rushed to the hospital at 4 o'clock. I overheard that if she didn't get her organs soon, she would suffer a violent death." I even heard them refer to euthanasia as an option. I left the hospital around 5:45. The clerks told me to drop by the rental place before they closed, so I did around 8 or 9. I found myself at the bottom of the few bottles at the local pub. I can't say for sure what the exact time was when you're drunk and numb and was tend to run together, but somehow even in my drunken stupor, the meaning of those numbers at the bottom of the lettuce hit me, how they were counting down to my daughter's final day. The day the predictions of the letters would come true when I came home late. The quigs were suddenly soothing. They lulled me to sleep that night. No nightmares and no visions, all they did was click to me in black unconsciousness, repeating the first letters, contents with a smooth rhythm. I had my instructions. I awoke the next morning. I felt good. The quicks told me that everything would go well today, that my daughter would soon be okay because I knew exactly what to do. So after a wash and a brief breakfast, I headed out to pick up the van from the rental place. For the next few hours I drove. The clicks were quiet. For the first time in a while, they were respecting my hunt around midday. I found my prey in a quiet, unfamiliar neighborhood. I spied a kid somewhere around my daughter's age. He had some frizzy hair, wore crooked glasses, and carried a large book bag. I didn't know what he was doing out or where he was going. I didn't care. This kid was perfect. I'm not a religious man, but that moment I was sure he was a godsend. This kid was here for me, for my daughter. I just had to get him. I pulled up beside him. "Hey there," I said in my friendliest voice. "Heavy bag. You've got there." Need alert before I could finish my sentence. The musky guy bolted, looking back. Could I blame him? No. But then suddenly, I was consumed with rage at him for running like that. He was teasing me. I shook as the clips roared like a marching band. "Get him, get him, get him." My muscles reacted before my brain could object. As I launched the van, Ford the Quakes approved at my quick decision. There was no screen. Not what I heard anyway. It was the thud that brought better sanity back, and the clicks lower to the point of being inaudible was like waking from a dream. What was I doing? I looked through the windshield onto the street to see something lying in front of the van. My heart stopped. I got out to get a better look. The kid's arms and legs were crooked and bent at fantastic angles as he lay sprawled flat on the asphalt. His book bag was busted open, its contents strewn around the scene. His glasses in his left sneaker had been knocked off somewhere. I couldn't tell where the blood was pooling from his head, from his mouth, from the limbs bent too far in the wrong directions. I covered my mouth. What had I done? Why? After slamming my palm against my forehead several times, I wondered if he might still be alive. Yes, he was still breathing anyway. The clicks reminded me that was all I needed. A kid that was alive. I looked around. We were still alone too. I had no excuse. I scooped him up in my arms, ignoring his warm bodily fluids dripping onto my arms. I opened the van's back door and laid him inside. I left before anyone could see us. It didn't take me long to realize that I had no idea where to go. The clicks have made no mention of where I should deliver the bleeding felony lying in the back seat after 10 minutes of cleaning the hood of the van for the kid's blood with my shirt and 30 minutes of aimless driving. I finally gained the nerve to head back home. Where else was I supposed to go without further instructions? Home was my best bet. Sure enough, leaning against my door was another blank envelope. I brought the envelope back to the van and opened it. This time the scribbles were more like an ink blot from a Rorschach test, as if the messenger were mocking my madness translated by the clicks, though it was a simple address. I took out my phone and entered it into the GPS. I can't say what happened afterwards. All I know is that for the next few hours, I drove from location to location. I don't remember any of the places I went or what I did in between. All I remember is my ultimate destination. The next thing I recall is driving along a long strip of empty road with no signs or hydro poles in sight. In the passenger seat was a stack of ink blots. I looked at my phone. It was dead. I then looked back to see that the kid I abducted wasn't. It looked like I had bandaged him at some point to stop the bleeding. He was quiet, so he must have still been unconscious, or maybe I knocked him out again. I don't know. After looking at him and then at the road, I finally started to feel guilty. Not just for running over an innocent kid, but for what I was doing to him now. Where I was taking him, I figured I would eventually come across some lone house in the middle of nowhere. Stories of mentally disturbed pedophiles keeping children in their basements for years to be tortured, raped, or worse rushed into my mind. I love my daughter. I thought I loved her so much. But was her life one that would end in less than 2 weeks? Worth the lifelong suffering of this one random kid? What would she say if she knew where I was now? The rational part of my brain finally broke through. I had to turn around, get this kid some medical attention. Forget the letters, forget the clicks, forget the smell, forget all the predictions I had to accept that my daughter would soon die, just as my wife had. If only I'd come to that conclusion. An hour earlier, impossibly fast, the road in front of me opened up in seconds. It wasn't a road anymore, but more like an unmarked parking lot, infinitely expanding in every direction. It was so smooth I would have believed it was only paved. That day, when I look back, the road I had been driving and was gone behind me was nothing but the infinite plane of asphalt. Rationality was replaced by fear as the van began to slow down. Eventually it stopped and shut off. I tried the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. There wasn't even a coffin engine trying to start up. I thought my chest tightened. I was now in the middle of a surreal. No, we're sitting in a dead van with a dead phone and a nearly dead kid. A light fog rolled onto the asphalt plain and I began to smell that damp smoke again, stronger than ever. I coughed. I opened the door and fell out of the van, somehow thinking the air would be fresh, or outside it wasn't. I lay on the ground coughing for a few minutes before my lungs suddenly adjusted. Once I finally stopped coughing, I felt a ray of something warm on me. When I got up, far in front of me was a figure holding a lantern in the fog. I couldn't make out any details of its features. It was then that I heard the clicks from its direction. I translated the lantern, began fading into the fog. I scrambled up desperately and ran for it eventually. However, after slowing down several times from exhaustion, I understood that as long as I kept moving toward it, the light would not fade every few seconds. A light breeze assaulted me with that smell. A new wind came and went, but never so shortly like this either way. I was certain I was heading to the source of the smell. When I looked down, I saw the ground had become more and more null and rocky, and it continued to do so. The further I went, then there were the clothes. The first article I noticed was a dirty sneaker that seemed like it had been there for years. It had rotted on the outside and lay there lonely. As I went further, more abandoned sneakers began showing up. Next came shirts, then pants, then other articles of clothing littered the area. Every time that breeze came through, they would drift back slightly. Then I saw where the clothes were coming from eventually. I came across a second figure. This one looked human. A girl. I mechanically into the asphalt. Her clothes were worn. Her pants were filled with holes like she'd been shot several times in the thighs. She was also missing a sneaker. When I approached her, she didn't notice me. She stared into the ground with red, bloodshot eyes, as if I wasn't even there. Faint black marks were drawn down the sides of her cheeks, as though she had been crying ash. That was most unnerved by her age. She couldn't have been older than 14 or 15 when I tried to touch her. They winced back. Her skin was hot, not hot like a fever, but hot like a burning stove. Something was wrong with her, I knew, but I couldn't do anything but continue on. The further I went, the more abandoned clothes and kids I saw. Most of them were missing at least one, if not more, articles of clothing. Some were only throwing their tools into the asphalt. Others were actually filling holes created. I glanced into one of the deeper ones being filled to see 2 kids naked and just standing. Some of the working ones, it was a medical miracle that they were even still alive. The more I followed the lantern, the more kids I began to notice who were missing things. Not just clothes. They were missing physical parts of themselves. One kid I noticed had pieces of meat scoot out of parts of his legs and abdomen, like ice cream servings. I could see the white of his ribs. Another girl looked to have a clean hole in a body where her heart was supposed to be. The boy looked like his eyes had been taken out, yet still he worked. they all skilled world. Then suddenly I noticed one kid. He was not working but running out of pure horror. I saw him in the distance heading across the asphalt. I watched it morbidly, curious to see what would happen, and knew in the back of my mind he wouldn't get far. They came out of the fog, tall, armless creatures that swooped around him. He didn't have a chance. There must have been 5 or 6. They had heads of pale, beautiful women, but the bodies of trees made of material that resembled satin. This boy didn't appear to be English, as I heard him plead in some foreign language. Even from a distance, I could see the figures smile, swinging their eyes closed as they listened to his cries. They opened their mouths, but rather than saying anything, they just clicked from their throats. Clicks I couldn't understand. They then bent their long bodies toward the center of the circle they created and put their heads upon their victim. I could guess walking went south, accompanied by the screams as the heads bobbed up and down inside the circle. This was the exchange I was prepared to make my daughter's life for the life of that kid. I didn't even know I would condemn him to live the rest of his days and beyond in this world, working until there was nothing left of him. I wondered what happened when there wasn't. I didn't try to run. Why was that? I wonder, was it because of what I saw? Was it because I remembered the van wouldn't work? Was it because part of me still wanted this horrible exchange? I don't know. Soon I noticed the fog getting darker with every step. I couldn't see the sky. But something told me the sun was setting. Eventually, there came a point when I no longer heard the sound of the children working. The area was black save for the lantern which was still guiding me. I was already beginning to feel claustrophobic when I heard moans to either side of me. They echoed like I was in some kind of cave. Even though I still felt the asphalt below my feet, I heard stomach-turning squishes with every step I took. As the distance between the lantern and I closed, I began to see the walls as the cave. Now it wasn't made of rock, but rather something organic. In the walls were bodies of skin and stripped of all muscle, bone, and organs. Nothing was left of these figures. And yet somehow I saw their mouths move in agony as they struggled against the moist prison. The air was filled with moaning. It's eating us. I thought about the breeze now strong. I wondered if I was actually in a cave at all. The lantern thing clicked. Stop. 5 feet. Separated me from the morbid walls. The figure clicked for me to look down. The cooler was there inside, wrapped up and kept fresh with dry ice were 1 heart and 2 fresh lungs. It was just as they promised. Silently, briefly had wondered to whom they belonged. The clicks promised them to be satisfactory for my daughter, followed by instructions on how to present them to avoid suspicion. I didn't ask any questions whether my silence stemmed from a fear for my life or from a sort of indifference. Now that the deed was done, I don't know. I just nodded in comprehension. Exempt. The thing clicked, exchanged. Then the lantern went out. I realized my eyes were closed. I opened them to see that I was back in my living room. The lights were out, and it was dark outside. I looked down and felt the cooler on my lap after setting the cooler off to the side. I went upstairs and got all of the letters together. The clicks didn't come back to translate them. This time I took them to the backyard and started a fire in the fire pit. I spent the hours until sunrise, slowly tossing each letter and envelope into the fire. Once everything was done, I had no proof of my encounter with that place. There was likewise no evidence pointing toward me for the disappearance of that kid. My phone and the addresses were gone for good. As I left both in the van itself mysteriously returned to the rental lot in immaculate condition. I silently gave the all ones I received from a deceased family member to the hospital for my daughter's operation. I had no evidence to prove my story. All I could do was try my best to accept what happened and move on. The surgery was a success. Months passed, and my daughter went back to school. I eventually managed to go back to work. I still had nightmares at that place. It was torture knowing that no one would ever find the corpse of the boy for whose death I was responsible. They say that what goes around comes around. That karma's a cow and always bites back. Whoever said that was right. Because karma bit hard yesterday, I came home to find my daughter gone. And my doormat was an envelope. When I picked it up, it didn't tingle. I opened it and found typed, "I'm sorry I had to. You should understand my daughter didn't come home that evening." Since then, I've been sitting here documenting this. When I started recounting my story, I wasn't sure what the account would ultimately be, a confession. No one would believe me. My suicide note if my daughter was in that place indefinitely deathlessly. Who would I be to take the easy way out while she suffered like that? I didn't know why, for whom I was compelled to write this down, I still don't know. But now the smell is back, the clicks are whispering in my ear, they tell me they have her. They tell me I can save her. They promise to help me get her back in perfect condition or better. But only after I make a few more exchanges.